Charles Bennett wasn't born with wealth. He was born in the back streets of Atlanta in 1963, during a time when the color of his skin closed more doors than it opened. As a boy, he dreamed of being an engineer, building machines that could change the world. He was bright, too bright for the world he lived in. But no matter how high his grades soared, racism followed him like a shadow. Scholarships were harder to get. Internships slipped through his hands. When his wife Lillian got sick, and when his daughter Denise was born, Charles set aside his dreams. He needed steady money. So he put on the blue janitor's uniform and took the job at Crestline Technologies, promising himself it would only be temporary. Temporary turned into 30 years. Every morning before sunrise, Charles arrived with his lunchbox. He was always the first in the building, unlocking doors, flicking on lights. He saw people come and go, CEOs, managers, young interns, who eventually became executives. And through it all, Charles remained invisible. He was the man who scrubbed their coffee stains, the one who fixed the pipes, the one who smiled politely, even when no one said thank you. To the company, he was just the janitor. But to his wife and daughter, he was the man who kept their family alive. It was a golden Monday morning. The sun poured through Crestline's glass lobby, bouncing off polished marble tiles Charles had buffed until his back screamed with pain. He was kneeling with a rag, wiping away a scuff mark, when the air changed. Andrew Sterling had arrived, a white man in his mid-40s, tall, sharp-suited, always with a smirk that dripped arrogance. Andrew inherited the company from his father, and everyone whispered that he didn't earn his position. He was born into it. Andrew treated janitors, waitresses, and even his own managers like disposable tools. To him, people were assets or trash. Andrew never walked. He strode. Expensive cologne filled the room as his leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble. A crowd of executives followed him like shadows, laughing too loudly at his jokes. Charles looked up briefly, then lowered his gaze. He knew his place. But Andrew stopped. His eyes narrowed at the old janitor polishing the floor. A cruel smirk tugged at his lips. Well, look at this. He tilted his head, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Man's been here decades, and he's still on his knees. Guess not everybody was born to succeed, huh? A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Some looked away, ashamed. Others smirked with Andrew, desperate to stay on his good side. Charles's chest tightened. His hands stilled on the rag. He wanted to say something, anything, but he knew the risk. A black janitor talking back to a white CEO? That wouldn't end well. Andrew wasn't finished. He leaned closer, voice dripping with venom. Don't scuff the marble, old man. These tiles are worth more than your whole life. The words sliced through Charles's pride. For a moment, silence filled the lobby. Then Andrew laughed, brushing past, leaving only humiliation in his wake. Charles swallowed hard. His throat burned, his pride stung, but he picked up his rag and kept scrubbing. Because dignity didn't pay bills. His daughter's tuition did. His wife's medicine did. And for that, he endured. 2 weeks later, the storm hit. Andrew came in that morning angrier than usual. His Italian leather shoes squeaked against the lobby floor, damp with streaks of water. A mop bucket stood nearby, left unattended. Andrew stopped dead in his tracks, his face twisting with rage. Who's responsible for this? His voice thundered across the lobby. People froze. Interns shuffled papers. Executives kept their heads down. Finally, a young security guard, trembling, pointed toward Charles. Andrew's gaze locked on him. "You," he spat, 30 years of cleaning, and you still don't know how to keep a floor dry? You're a hazard. You're done." Charles's stomach dropped. "Sir, please." Andrew raised his hand, silencing him like a servant. "Save it. I don't pay mistakes. Security, escort this man out." Effective immediately, whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone watched as two guards walked toward Charles, his face flushed with shame. "Please," Charles begged, his voice cracking. "This is my livelihood. My wife, she's sick. My daughter's in school. I'll fix it. Just give me a chance," Andrew sneered. "We don't run a charity." "Get him out." The guards grabbed Charles by the arms. He tried to keep his dignity, but tears blurred his vision as he was dragged across the marble floor he had polished for 3 decades. The doors slammed shut behind him. 30 years of loyalty, gone in minutes. That night, Charles sat at his worn wooden kitchen table. His hands, rough and calloused, trembled as he held his head. Bills were stacked high. Lillian sat beside him, pale but strong, her thin hand resting on his. "You did what you had to," she whispered. "You kept us alive." But Charles shook his head. "I let him strip me of everything. My dignity, my worth." Lillian squeezed his hand. "No, Charles." He only saw a janitor. He never saw the man behind the uniform. Charles's eyes burned. For 30 years, he had swallowed humiliation. But now Andrew had crossed the line. Because Andrew didn't know the truth. Charles wasn't just a janitor. He had once been an engineer. He had patents, designs for energy systems ahead of their time. And though the world shut him out, he never stopped thinking, never stopped creating. Quietly, over the years, he had invested. Small amounts at first, scraps from his paycheck. But those scraps grew. And now, hidden behind his humility, Charles had something Andrew couldn't imagine. A plan, a future, a fortune. Andrew Sterling thought he had thrown away a janitor. But he had just awakened a giant. The days after Charles's firing were heavy. He would wake up before dawn, still reaching for his janitor's uniform out of habit, before remembering he no longer had a place to go. He sat by the window as the world moved on without him. Buses hissed down the street, carrying men and women in suits, briefcases in hand. Charles felt like he had been discarded, tossed aside like the trash he once collected. But Lillian saw what he couldn't. One evening, as the soft glow of the lamp flickered over the kitchen table, she slid a dusty box toward him. "Charles," she whispered, her eyes shining with quiet strength. "Maybe it's time." He frowned. "Time for what?" She lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, blueprints, diagrams, sketches filled with numbers only Charles could understand. His inventions, his hidden brilliance. "You always said you'd change the world one day," Lillian said. "Maybe the world wasn't ready then. But it's ready now." Charles's hands trembled as he touched the blueprints. Memories rushed back. Late nights spent dreaming. The sting of rejection letters. The humiliation of being told he wasn't fit for engineering because of the color of his skin. For years, he had buried that part of himself. But now, something burned inside him. Andrew had tried to break him. Instead, he had given Charles a reason to rise. What Andrew Sterling never knew was that Charles hadn't wasted those decades as a janitor. Every month, after paying bills and medicine, Charles set aside a small sum. At first, it was only $20. then $50. Over the years, he studied markets the way others studied gossip. He read financial papers during lunch breaks. He listened quietly when executives spoke about stocks, memorizing names and companies. And slowly, steadily, he invested. He believed in technology, in renewable energy, in startups no one else cared about. Some failed, but some exploded. And now, hidden behind the modest walls of his small house, Charles had a portfolio worth millions. He had remained humble, even secretive, because he knew the dangers of showing wealth when you were black in a world that judged you by your skin. But inside, he carried quiet power. Andrew Sterling thought he had thrown out a janitor, but what he had really done was insult a millionaire. It was Denise, his daughter, who pushed him further. "Dad," she said one night, her voice firm, "I know what Andrew did to you hurt, but don't let him win. Show them who you really are." Denise was in law school now, brilliant and fiery. She had grown up watching her father's sacrifices, seeing how racism forced him into the shadows. And now she wanted justice, not just for herself, but for him. Charles looked into her determined eyes. For the first time in years, he felt hope stir. "I'll show him," Charles murmured, "but not the way he expects. He'll see the man behind the uniform. And when he does, it will be too late." Months passed, and Charles's life transformed. With Denise's sharp legal mind, Lillian's steady support, and a few trusted partners, Charles launched his own company, Bennett Innovations. It started small, an office above a bakery, a handful of young engineers who believed in his vision. But soon, the brilliance of his designs attracted attention. Investors who once ignored him now begged for a seat at the table. News outlets ran headlines: "Unknown engineer disrupts clean energy market." Bennett Innovations poised to rival Crestline Technologies. The same executives who once walked past Charles in the janitor's uniform were now calling him sir. But Charles never forgot the humiliation. He never forgot Andrew Sterling's smirk. And he knew this was just the beginning. Andrew Sterling sat in his penthouse, sipping bourbon when his assistant rushed in. "Sir, you might want to see this." On the screen, a news anchor smiled. Bennett Innovations, founded by Charles Bennett, is quickly becoming a leader in renewable energy. Industry experts predict it could overtake Crestline within 2 years. Andrew's glass nearly slipped from his hand. "Charles Bennett?" he roared. "The janitor?" His assistant hesitated. "Apparently, not just a janitor, sir. He's an inventor, and he's worth millions." Andrew's face burned. The man he humiliated in front of his employees, the man he tossed out like trash, was now being hailed as a genius. For the first time in years, Andrew felt something he had never known before. Fear. It happened at a tech conference in New York. Andrew was scheduled to speak, boasting about Crestline's future. But when he arrived, he saw another name on the main stage lineup: Charles Bennett, CEO of Bennett Innovations. The room buzzed with excitement. People whispered, phones clicked with photos. Andrew plastered on a fake smile, but inside, rage burned. Charles took the stage, his voice calm, confident. He spoke of innovation, sustainability, and building a future that left no one behind. He ended with words that made the crowd erupt. For too long, people like me, people who were judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their minds, were told we didn't belong in rooms like this. But we're not asking for permission anymore. We're here, and we're building the future. The applause shook the hall. Andrew's speech afterward? Flat, forced, forgotten. And Andrew knew. He was losing his grip. Behind the applause, Crestline was crumbling. Andrew's risky overseas deal backfired. Investors fled, stock prices tumbled, and whispers of his arrogance became full-blown accusations of incompetence. Meanwhile, Bennett Innovations soared. Charles secured government contracts. Young engineers flocked to him, inspired by his story. His company symbolized not just innovation, but resilience and justice. Andrew tried smear campaigns, hiring firms to dig into Charles's past, but every attack backfired. The public only admired Charles more for overcoming decades of systemic racism and still rising above. The empire Andrew built with pride was falling, and the man he once mocked as just a janitor was the reason why. One rainy evening, Andrew showed up at Charles's office unannounced. His once polished suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Charles," he said, almost pleading, "we can work together. Merge Crestline with Bennett Innovations. Save what's left." Charles studied him, the silence heavy. Once he might have begged for Andrew's respect, but not anymore. "Andrew," Charles said slowly, "you saw me as invisible. You mocked me because of my skin. You fired me to feed your ego. And now you stand here because you need me." Andrew's lips trembled. "Please, don't destroy me." Charles leaned forward. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every humiliation he had endured. "I'm not destroying you, Andrew. You did that yourself. I just built what you never could, something that lasts." And with that, he walked away, leaving Andrew Sterling standing in the shadow of his own downfall. Years later, Charles Bennett became a name etched in history books. His company transformed industries, his inventions changed lives, and his story inspired generations. Schools taught about him, not as a janitor, but as an innovator who proved resilience could outshine racism. At home, Charles still sat by the same window sometimes, but now, instead of despair, he felt peace. Lillian sat beside him, Denise laughed in the kitchen, and the house felt full of hope. He didn't need revenge. He had something better: victory, dignity, and a legacy that could never be erased. Meanwhile, at Crestline Technologies, Andrew Sterling was celebrating his latest victory. He had just signed a risky deal overseas, boasting to his board that it would make billions. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. The deal was built on shaky numbers. Costs were rising, and whispers began to spread that Andrew was reckless, arrogant, blind to real strategy. Still, Andrew laughed it off. "I built this company," he told his board. "No one questions me." But the truth? He had no idea the man he humiliated was about to become his biggest competition. One rainy morning, Charles walked into a lawyer's office with Denise by his side. He laid out his blueprints, his patents, and his investment portfolio. The lawyer's eyes widened. "Mr. Bennett, do you realize what you're sitting on? These designs could revolutionize clean energy. And with your financial assets, you have enough to launch your own company." Charles's lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time, he wasn't just a janitor. He was an inventor, a visionary, a businessman. But more than that, he was a man on a mission. Because this wasn't just about success. It was about dignity. It was about showing Andrew Sterling and the world that a black man's society dismissed as just a janitor could rise higher than anyone ever imagined. And Charles Bennett was just getting started.